So the last time this channel took a hiatus, I had been planning when I got back to rebrand both this YouTube channel and the band that it ostensibly exists to promote. So the last time that the channel took a hiatus, I had been planning to rebrand upon my return both this YouTube channel and the band that it ostensibly exists to promote. I've always felt a little unsure about the name Electric Brain, Electric Shadow, both as a band name because it's kind of awkward and ungainly, and as a channel name because it doesn't really say anything about the content of the channel. I was certain for about a week that the name of the channel should be Prog Rock Hot Takes, which was suggested by my friend Keith, and that the name of the band should be shortened to just Electric Shadow, which would be more manageable, shorter, of course, more, comfortable to say, and would still have the benefit of being connected to the old band name in the way of Jefferson Starship shortening to Starship, or Vandergraaf Generator shortening to Vandergraaf, though, of course, not as significant as either of those rebrands. But that plan didn't go through, as you may have noticed. The reason for that being that it turns out there are already two artists on Spotify called Electric Shadow, plus another band called The Electric Shadows. None of them has any meaningful audience at all, but of course neither do I. And, I didn't want people to go try to find me on Spotify and then land on one of the other Electric Shadows with no meaningful audience and listen to them instead. So after that, I spent a while trying to think of a different band name, keeping my eyes open for something that felt just right, But every time I found something that felt like it might work, I would look it up and discover somebody was already on Spotify with that name, almost always somebody with a single-digit number of monthly listens. My wife suggested Big Electric Cat, which is taken from the name of an Adrian Belew song, but of course that was already used by a Australian goth band from the early 90s. I read a Japanese essay called In Praise of Shadows that had some ideas that I found very compelling that I think tie into some of what my music does, but it's taken by some Danish guy who does solo piano music for, 9 monthly listeners. And I'm not going to bore you with all the other things that I thought about, fell a little bit in love with, and then, had to discard when it turned out that they were already taken. But there were quite a few. Now, this isn't the only time I've run into something like this. In the early 2010s, I was in a post-punk band called Phobos and Deimos. Our music is still on streaming, but we put it up a little bit before everybody got super into streaming, or at least before we were regular streamers. And we, over time, we've discovered that if you search Phobos and Deimos on Spotify, your first hit will be a band called Deimos and Phobos. Next up will be a different band called Phobos and Deimos. And then, once you've dug through a long list of other results, podcasts about the moons of Mars, etc., then eventually you will find Phobos and Deimos with an ampersand, except that some data entry person at Spotify has consolidated us with another artist by the same name who does, no insult to them, but very bland, underwhelming techno music. And their music actually, in our shared artist profile, the top 2 songs are by them. This effect is not limited by medium, in fact. In another life, I spent a few years trying to be a novelist, but if I were continuing that goal now, I would have to contend with the fact that when you Google Hans Berger author, the first page shows you a German psychiatrist and a man who writes about programming. Now, both of these are spelled with an E, but Google assumes that the correct spelling of my name must be a typo. It does give you the option to see only results for Hans Berger with a U, which then gives you Hannes Berger, the film director and critic, who sometimes went by Hans Berger with no U, and the Dutch theologian who wrote a book called Being in Christ. Now, obviously, these are not totally insoluble problems, but when everything that you do hits this sort of wall, then it begins to feel like another sign of the exhaustion of culture, when even the ability to name ourselves becomes a titanic struggle, or, a problem with no good answer. Choosing band names has kind of always sucked, but up until the Spotify era, you could at least ignore the fact that maybe some local band from New Jersey that you would otherwise never encounter was using the same name. Death and Nirvana, those are both bands that would not have taken their names if they had formed today, because earlier bands had released albums under that name, albeit incredibly obscure albums that, did not have any kind of a legacy at the time that the later Deaths and Nirvanas were being formed. Genesis was also being used as a band name by bands from America and Venezuela around the time that the first album came out by the Genesis that we now know and love. It used to be that you could take the name, do your best with it, and if you happened to reach prominence first, then it was yours. And that's not really the same today. I made a video last year about the question of whether or not music is dead, based on the idea that maybe it's reached some kind of point of natural stylistic exhaustion where there just isn't much left to explore. I think there's a version of that related to naming, where any word or phrase in the English language that could make a vivid, memorable band name has been taken, right? All that's left are ungainly, overlong combinations like electric brain, electric shadow, or things that sound kind of stupid and meaningless without knowing the backstory, like, 21 Pilots. I don't really know what the solution to this is beyond, I guess, just not starting bands anymore. My first thought was that perhaps we could come to the social and legal agreement that all band names are now reopened for use, right? We've used them all up, so we're going to make them all available again. If you want to call your band Nirvana, you can actually go ahead and do that. Nobody will hassle you about it. For that matter, if you are called Nirvana, then as long as you use that name, then you can play the songs of either of their Nirvanas that have previously existed without paying royalties, or, you can play your own songs in the style of those bands, or you can do some unrelated thing and just use the name. Your choice, right? Now, would this cause a certain amount of chaos? Yeah, sure, but, maybe it would be an interesting generative sort of chaos. You might also name bands like you would assign a VIN number to a car, right? Where certain digits denote the car's particular specs. So instead of having a name, a band would have just an identifying code indicating the genre, the type of instruments, the emotional tone of the lyrics, various other things like that, with a couple of spaces reserved for randomly selected digits to make that identifier unique. You'd probably have to have some kind of central naming commission assigning these, I guess. And you might have to revise them if the band changed their style drastically, but, that would help avoid confusion and duplication. Realistically, these are both sort of awful ideas, but it does also seem like we've just sort of hit a wall around this, and I'm not sure what else to do other than what we are, in fact, actually going to do, which is continue with a bunch of new bands with weird or awkward or not that great names, or, 3 or 4 different bands all kind of awkwardly sharing the same name in perpetuity. In the meantime, I guess I'm keeping Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. It's too many syllables. I don't really love just saying it, but I'm no longer convinced that a better choice actually is possible. In fact, I might begin thinking of that band name partly as a meta-commentary on the impossibility of good band names, which is a dreadful idea. Incidentally, if you're wondering, can't remember if I've said this on the channel before, but a few years ago I knew someone who had lived in China for a while, and he told me once that the Chinese word for computer translates literally as electric brain. The Chinese word for television translates literally as electric shadow. I wrote those 2 phrases on the back of a notebook, and, I would glance at that periodically for years every time I picked that notebook up to write lyrics in it. That conjunction of words just sort of happened to stick in my brain, particularly as it became clearer and clearer that we do all, in fact, live in the electric shadow of the electric brain. If you liked that little ramble, if you found it amusing, please check out the playlist of my music that you'll find in the description for this video. As long as you're at it, if you like this video, if you subscribe to the channel, let me know in the comments whether, there's a solution to all this that you are thinking I'm missing. Let me know in the comments if you have what you think would be a better name for my band. Then all this meaningless work will have become meaningful work. Thank you much for listening. Have a good day.